welcome to my art journey part 2. I left off part 1 where I'd just finished school and I'd been rejected from art college and had started working or training as an electrical engineer with my dad. I spent 2 years doing that. All the time I was still drawing and painting in my spare time. I worked for a few other companies and then I eventually set up my own business. And I actually was thinking of a funny story that from that. My sister, my older sister, was very kindly acting as my secretary, taking calls for me. So I'd call her in the evening to take the jobs for the next day. And one night I called and she said, yeah, you've got a job tomorrow morning. It's a bit awkward. And I said, why is it awkward? And she said, the lady's name is Mrs. Piss. And I said, Mrs. Piss? And she said, yes, P-I-S-S. I said, it can't be Mrs. Piss. And she said, it is. I asked her to spell it out. So the next day I went to the house to repair the washing machine, finished the repair, and I was writing out the invoice. And I said to the lady, thankfully, I said to the lady, sorry, what was the name again? And she said, Mrs. Piff, P-I-F-F. So that was a close one. Anyway, I digress. So it all came to a crunch where I had my own business for about 2 years, and I was repairing a machine that was in an outhouse of a house in the country, and it was full of water. It was blocked up, so I was working underneath it. I undid the sump hose and 9 gallons of filthy, soapy, dirty water flooded out and soaked me. And that was the point when I thought, that's it, I've had enough, I'm going to art college. So I rang my sister that night and said, I'm shutting the business down, I'm not doing another day, don't take any more calls. Got in touch with the art college. And they said, my local art college, and they said, I said, what do I need to do? And they said, you need to bring a portfolio. And this is embarrassing, but I actually didn't know what a portfolio was. I said, what's a portfolio? And they said, some of your work. And I said, oh, okay, I can do that. So I went for an interview with Terry Hurley, I believe it was. Lovely chap. And he said, absolutely, we'd give you a space on the course. This was a foundation course, a 1-year foundation course. But we're full this year, so we can't take you this year, but we can next year. I just thought, what I'm going to do for the next year. I managed to get a job at my local newspaper in the publication department, which was fantastic. It was great fun. So I was involved with the newspaper and I started drawing and sketching. I was doing cartoons of the people I work with, and then when things came up, like there were problems with the unions back then, they were very strong, the unions, and they'd get upset if we had to do one little tiny extra job. They'd want a lot of money for everybody in the building, so there were all sorts of disputes. So I would draw cartoons, and one time the union leader had to go up from our department to see the managers and talk about this problem they had. And the night before I'd drawn a cartoon. So I gave it to Bill and I said, take that up and give it to them. I think it was in an envelope. So he did. And they were laughing so much they had to abandon the interview, or the discussion, so it was all over. So I did a lot of that. And I remember thinking about this, because when you're thinking about doing these things come to mind. And I remember that I actually had my first piece of art published in the newspaper, and it was a cartoon of a very old newspaper seller called Robbie, and he'd been selling in the promenade for years and years and years, since I was a little tiny boy. And he would sit there lunchtime when the papers would come out, He'd sit on his little box with his pile of newspapers, and he'd just keep repeating echo, 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 and then people would come up and buy the newspaper off him. And unfortunately, while I was there that year, he died, because he must have been in his 80s. So I drew a cartoon, which they published. And I don't know what happened to it. I don't have it. I can't find it anywhere, which is annoying because it's the first thing I ever had published. I just remembered the cartoon was of him on a big statue of him in the centre of town, and there were two men standing there commenting on it, and I can't remember what the joke was, but I could probably go back to my local town and look that up and find it, so I'll do that one day. So after a year working at my local newspaper and getting much more into art, I was doing all sorts of different drawings and things, especially coming up to the time of going to art college. I started to do more and more, and then I finally started my year at Foundation College, which was fantastic, so inspirational to be around other artists. And I also realised how little I'd been educated on the art front, on the old masters and things, because I was amazed when we had the lessons on the artists. There were so many I'd never heard of. It was embarrassing. And also I hadn't had much experience of using different mediums. So the foundation course was absolutely fantastic because it allowed me to experiment and try all sorts of things. And that's when I started to find that I was really, really, really interested in a more cartoony style and in capturing people and caricaturing them. So I had a lot of fun with that while I was at college. And also, meeting all these great people, one of which, the other mature student, I was a mature student then, and the other mature student in our year was Ollie Harrison, who was the drummer for the 80s band The Photos, that had a #1 album, I think, in 1981. So that was interesting, and lost touch with everyone. I'm sure Ollie's doing very well for himself. I hope he is. So at the end of my foundation, I applied to get on to a degree course and was accepted at Exeter College of Art and Design. My foundation course was at Cheltenham, which I haven't said. And then I took off at that point for a glorious 6-week trip on my dad's old boat around the Mediterranean and sketched like a man possessed. I think I read 10 books as well. So I will leave that for part 3. Thanks again for watching and listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode.